Of a rich millionaire who decides that for his 50th birthday he's going to throw a massive party for himself. And so during this party, and he's known to be a bit of a showman and a little bit of an eccentric, he grabs the microphone and he announces to his guests that down in the garden of his mansion he has a swimming pool with two great white sharks that live in it, that swim in it. And he says, "I will give anything to the man brave enough who would swim across my swimming pool." Well, the party continues. Needless to say, no one was too eager to jump into the pool until suddenly they heard a great splash, and all the guests at the party run to the pool to see what has happened. And in the pool, they see a man who is swimming frantically with his arms and legs kicking as fast as he can, and you see the fins of the sharks, like the jaws, dun-na, and you see them moving closer to this man, and he just keeps swimming frantically until he gets to the edge of the pool, hoists himself out of the pool, tired and soaked and a little bit shocked, and the millionaire grabs the microphone and says, he gives him a little couple claps and says, "Well, I'm a man of my word. Anything that I possess, you may ask and I will give it to you. One of my Ferraris, maybe my mansion, or maybe even the hand of my beautiful daughter. Absolutely anything you ask. You are the bravest man I have ever seen. So, sir, what will it be?" Well, the guy grabs the microphone and says, "Well, why don't we start with the name of that jerk that pushed me in the pool?" Well, sometimes I hear stories of how the wealthy spend their money, and I have to admit, I can hardly fathom it. I came across something this week that kind of caught my attention. It was a list by the Financial Post listing the 50 coolest, they say, or I would probably say ridiculous, things that rich people bought this year. And so we're going to go through this list, and I'm going to see if you can guess how much you think some of these items may have gone for. So first on the list, a hot dog. Not just any hot dog. This is the most expensive hot dog known to man. It was made of a 1/4 pound of premium beef, topped with lobster tail, saffron aioli, and gold flakes. How's that for a condiment? Gold flakes. And it was sold in Little Rock, Arkansas. Any ideas? $1,500. $1,501, actually, to be exact. Proceeds apparently went to charity, I should hope so. Let's do the next one here. This is a large chocolate egg. 110-pound chocolate egg. It took 7 artisan chocolatiers 3 days to handcraft it. Any guesses? This is kind of like an auction, I sort of feel like. How much? $11,200 for a 100-pound chocolate egg. I like chocolate, but there's no way I'm coughing up that kind of money. Next, we have a tooth. But not just any tooth. John Lennon's tooth. John Lennon's tooth. Any guesses how much it's sold for? $31,200 for John Lennon's tooth. Next we have the most expensive bottle of wine ever sold, a 200-year-old bottle from the Antique Wine Company. The most expensive wine bottle ever sold. Any ideas? No, not quite that much. $117,000 for a bottle of white wine. Next we have the largest tuna ever caught. A 539-pound bluefin tuna caught off the coast of Japan.
60,000.
Way higher. $736,000 for a 500-pound tuna. Now, pennies have been in the news as Canada is getting rid of its pennies. This is one of the first pennies ever minted in the U.S., dated 1793. Adjust for inflation now. How much is that penny worth today? $1.38 million it's sold for a penny. Now that's inflation, right? And of course, baseball spring training started. Games started yesterday for those who don't know, so I thought this was interesting. Babe Ruth's jersey, New York Yankees, sold for, how much do you think? $4.4 million. And lastly, for the art lovers out there, much as the screen painting sold for $119 million. $119 million. Got to love art, I guess, to put that much money into it. I couldn't help but think about all these ways, about all the money poured into these things, that significance really only have significance because we give them significance. And it made me kind of put things in perspective a little bit about the money that's been spent. And I came across an author named Jeffrey Sachs who estimates that it would take $175 billion a year for 20 years to end extreme poverty around the world. $175 billion per year for 20 years. Now that might seem like a huge amount of money, but put in context, this represents less than 1% of the combined incomes of the richest countries in the world. Less than 1% of just the richest countries in the world. And to put it in perspective again, the military budget in the U.S. alone is $680 billion per year. When you think about that. It seems to me that in our culture and in our day, those who are the most blessed, that being really us, are not always being a great blessing to others or to those in greatest need of blessings. Now, thousands of years ago, the story begins, the story that we have in Scriptures, of early humanity, of the first family, and we hear of murder even within that very first family, of a brother killing a brother. And we see this horrific escalation of violence ensue. Families against each other. Conflict, alienation, hardship ensues. People become cut off from one another. The people multiply. Violence and human degradation become the norm. God gets so disgusted with it, he sends the flood to start clean. Even right after the flood, even this escalation of sin and violence ensues again. And God is desperately searching for someone on the earth that was good and that was righteous. And he found one. And he found this one that we call Father. We could flip, so founding father, not this Father Abraham, but flip to the next one. This Father Abraham, as I talked about with the kids this morning. Originally his name was Abraham. He lived a nomadic life, traveling with his family and those connected with his family. And at the time of the reading today, he's already experienced this conflict and the escalation of sin in his own life. He gets cut off from his nephew Lot. There's conflict there. He has military conflicts with neighboring peoples in Palestine. He experienced firsthand the fact that the world was full of violence and sin. But he also knew and came to know and understand that this was unacceptable to God. No sooner has the book of Genesis introduced the persons of Abraham and Sarah than it records Yahweh's promise to this first family of Israel, go from your country. And this statement, go from your country, this command is immediately followed by, and I will make of you a great nation. Words by which the reader is clearly informed that this journey is to be like no other of the countless folk migrations of human history. Yahweh is summoning Abraham and Sarah to a new life, in order that all humankind may experience renewal and deliverance from sin. He says, in you, all the families shall be blessed. This has in mind the depressing cycle of sin and suffering represented by the previous stories of Abel's murder, of widespread sexual license in Genesis 6, and the enormous hubris of the human family that we read about in Genesis 11. Things must change, or Yahweh will simply not be able to tolerate these miserable humans whom Yahweh has created. The vehicle of this change is to be the family of Abraham and Sarah. They are to become a great nation, not for purposes of grandeur or political power, but in order that they may be a blessing to others. A vehicle of change. From the beginning of the scriptural narrative, God is calling people out to be vehicles of change and blessings to others. Abraham's offspring would multiply in Egypt, become so great a number that Pharaoh felt threatened by them, so he enslaved them. They cried out to the Lord, and he answered them. He sent another vehicle of change, Moses, to lead them out of Egypt and into the promised land. Eventually, Abraham's descendants became the people of Israel. And under King David, they rose to prominence. Under Solomon, David's son, and other kings. However, they became so prosperous that they forgot where they came from. And they forgot the Abraham covenant that had extended to them. And they ceased being a blessing to others for a time. They enslaved others. They neglected those in need, choosing rather to be consumed by their wealth and sinful appetites. Prophets would rise up to repeatedly call them back to a faith that fights for justice and peace. Sometimes they listened, but mostly the prophets' cries went unanswered. The prophets would foretell the rise and fall of empires and warn the people not to be on the side of the powerful and the prestigious, but to align themselves with those God especially cares for, the enslaved, the poor, those pushed to the margins of society. Most often the prophets would be so despised, the authorities or the masses would have them killed. And it seems that time and time again, the prophets were most frequently killed in Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the literal and symbolic center of the life of the people of Israel. And this is where we find another prophet, a new kind of prophet, the most unique vehicle of change, the most splendid of blessings. He preaches sermons about blessing those who mourn, who are poor, meek, and hunger and thirst for righteousness. He overturns the tables of those profiting from exploiting poor worshippers at the temple. He breaks cultural and religious taboos and allows his followers to associate his words and deeds as those of God's. The religious authorities, the political entities, well, they want to take him out because he's undermining their authority, because he's leading a revolution that they can't control. Not a revolution of violence, but of selflessness and service, especially to the down and outers. Because the status quo is just not acceptable. Jesus responds to their warnings in their gospel today by pointing out that he was doing kingdom work, casting out demons, healing the sick, declaring the good news. And he identifies himself with ardent prophets that had gone before him that meet their end in Jerusalem, knowing that he too will pay the price for his actions. But he also offers an important clue that ought to resonate in their historical memory. He says, "You will not see me again until the time you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" The blessed. Him. Jesus is the blessed. Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of the blessing God promised Abraham thousands of years earlier. He's a descendant of Abraham, and he comes to represent God fully in ways that others repeatedly failed. He lived his life as a blessing to others, healing and delivering outsiders as well as insiders, calling others to join in his work of redeeming and healing the world. My friends, to those God has blessed much, much is also required. We are the privileged 5% in this world. Sure, most of us here, I think, couldn't afford $1,500 hot dogs. But we are comparatively wealthy when we consider ourselves in the context of the global majority. In the season of Lent, we are especially called to consider the path that we are walking. Are we walking in the footsteps of Jesus? Are we being vehicles of change in a world that panders to the rich and the respectable? Are we a blessing to others? Or do we guard and protect what we have for fear that it will be taken from us? Are we, as the church, symbolic of the light and witness of Jesus Christ? I admit that these are huge questions. Questions that ought to provoke us to think and consider. Not to wallow in guilt, for guilt is not helpful, but to be challenged to think, how am I being a vehicle of change? For some of us, it is sharing that message. People like Rob Bell and Golden, who wrote the book that we're studying in Lent, are calling us to that challenge of thinking about these things. Others get involved politically to make a difference, to bring about systemic change. in order to encourage or even force our government to act on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves. Still, other people get hands-on with things, and they volunteer and work at some wonderful initiatives like we have, like Out of the Cold or the Etobicoke Youth Network. Others give and support causes like Noah and others. I know many do in this church. But if you haven't found a way to really, your own unique way of being a blessing to others, this is a wonderful opportunity and time of the year to think about those things. And the Lenten season traditionally is a season where we practice spiritual disciplines, and one of those spiritual disciplines has historically been the gift of almsgiving, that is, of giving freely to the poor. And I think in this time of the year it is a great opportunity that we have to think about how we might practice that discipline today. What are those things that we can do? And we're doing the penny drive and the coin drive to help with Out of the Cold. But what other ways can we speak up and act on behalf of others? May we take up Christ's cause to speak release to the captives and life to those in the clutches of desperation. And as we do so, may we find the way, the unique way, that this church and that we as individuals are called to share Jesus' love in the days to come.